Governor Abbott has taken a lot of heat over how he used his emergency powers during the pandemic. Republicans said his shutdown and mask orders went too far. Democrats say he was wrong to limit how local governments could respond to the virus. Now lawmakers in both parties are looking at ways to rein in the governor's authority. For insight into the debate, we're joined by State Bureau reporter Wes Rapaport. Wes, how important is this for lawmakers?
Hey, Josh. Well, first off, there was no real framework for how to approach a pandemic, new to a lot of people, obviously. So this bill, House Bill 3, is the House's big kind of overarching pandemic response bill. It outlines who is responsible for what and what those roles are during the pandemic. This happened during the interim when lawmakers weren't in session. So that is something that is driving this effort.
Wes, what are some of the steps being proposed to rein in the governor's powers?
Well, one of the key measures is a pandemic oversight committee. It's made up of key lawmakers from several different committees, as well as the lieutenant governor and the speaker. They can override disaster declarations and can strike down any suspension or waiver of rules during a declared disaster. There is also efforts in there in this bill to prevent the closures of firearms stores and churches during a pandemic as well.
Realistically, how much is going to change? Is there enough support to reform the governor's emergency powers yet?
Well, it's a good question. One thing that lawmakers have been pretty vocal about here is that the governor was kind of the one person making decisions for the entire state during the interim. Sure, he was getting input from lawmakers, but this bill would detail more formally that process. And in that vein, when the federal pandemic funding was approved, lawmakers didn't have a formal say in where some of that money went. So that is something being worked on as an amendment to this bill. Josh, one concern brought up was civil liability protections for small businesses. Lawmakers want to make sure businesses making the best efforts to operate safely during the pandemic get protections, but that doesn't mean that everyone is acting in good faith.
Wes Rapaport, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks.
While millions of Texans went without power during the winter storm, some parts of the state kept the lights on. Our investigation looks at why lessons learned from a previous storm protected some power providers this time around. Plus, who's next in line for the COVID vaccine and why? We look at how Texas compares to other states when it comes to Phase 1C.